Hey guys on YouTube and later on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you manage to find this. I don't know how the internet works fully. But tonight we've got Chris, otherwise known as Bring Me the Swampy on Instagram. He's been doing some really good work over in Ukraine, mostly demining, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of the probably the busiest place on Earth for that mission right now. And I'm sure it gets plenty spicy over there. So over the next hour or so, we'll kind of pick your brain on what that's been like and a little bit more about who you are and your background. And then if anybody has any questions that they drop in YouTube, we'll try to answer those as we go. So,
Okay.
Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly for everybody that's either watching now or listening later?
Sure. So my real name, which I'm starting to forget at this point, is Chris. I'm 39 years old. I'm from the Isle of Man in the United Kingdom. It's a small island off the coast of the UK. And I've been involved certainly in Ukraine since 2014, since August. It's been a mix since 2014. I was involved in combat operations for 3.5 years, and I then stepped away at the end of 2017. And then after Russia's full-blown invasion, I came back in 3 days after the invasion, and I've mostly just concentrated on EOD operations since then.
Awesome. So did you were in Ukraine following the push into Crimea? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So I had been in Southeast Asia doing some mine clearance in 2014 from January. I finished up there at the end of July, start of August 2014, got back home to the UK and found out that it had gone from the protests at this point to obviously the Russians taking over Crimea, the conflict starting in the east of Ukraine in Luhansk and Donetsk. I was invited over by some Ukrainians because of the situation at the time. The Ukrainian military was maybe 20,000 strong. They'd never been at war outside of their time during the Soviet Union, and they just needed support in any way. So I still had my bags packed from Asia, wasn't really happy about settling back home again. So I thought I'd go out for maybe 2 or 3 months to try and offer any support, whether it was from a mine clearance point of view, medical point of view. And 3 months turned into 3.5 years.
And I guess what was your my only experience working with I guess like host nation folks was also over in Southeast Asia. So I did a month in Cambodia.
Okay.
So I taught demining, or I thought I was teaching demining, right? I was really teaching like demining operation management. I didn't find that out until I got there. So we had kind of some goofy curriculum with like Red Cross and workers' rights type things were baked in there as well. I do want to ask more about the Ukraine side, but can you kind of tell us what it was like working over in Asia first to kind of set the stage for your experience in demining there?
Well, I mean, Asia is where I cut my teeth. So I am ex-British forces, but I was only in the British Army for a year. I had a knee injury and ended up coming out before the end of my service. Had nothing to do with mine clearance or bomb disposal, combat engineer, nothing like that. And I started getting involved with the KNLA in Burma, the Karen National Liberation Army, through the Karen National Union. So I started doing volunteer work out in Southeast Asia first, just ad hoc, take a flight out there, had some very good connections and carried on. And then I met a British EOD tech and a Swedish EOD tech that was doing cross-border work into Myanmar, into Karen State. And I met them by chance, and I kind of saw something where, hey, I can be more useful doing this. It was something that interested me. I wouldn't say that I'm a risk taker, but I work better in high-risk environments. I've always found jobs that are a little bit more risky kind of keep my attention span a little bit better. And so they pretty much taught me on the job. And we spent 6 months the first stint clearing around a number of villages in Karen State. And as you know yourself, if you've spent time in Cambodia, it's extremely hot. You're you're scurrying around in the forest and in the ground where it's not just the landmines, but it's the local wildlife that wants to kill you as well. So the landmines were kind of the least of the worry. It was quite nice to go to work once you'd already tapped your boots out and put them on and got into the minefield. So, but a very interesting place to learn, and a very, very good starting point for me, because it wasn't through the military and because it wasn't through an organization. I wasn't bound by certain bits of curriculum that at that time really didn't matter. It was about what's the threat assessment, how do we go around it, how do we get on with the job.
And I'd imagine most of what you guys were working on there would have been leftovers from the Vietnam conflict, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So mostly American M14s, and then we were dealing with PMM1, PMM2, which were, to be honest, the ones that we were finding were Burmese copies. They were Myanmar copies of Soviet originals. But then you're also dealing with a lot of homemade landmines that are made both by Burmese military and the Karen as well. So, and a lot of it's very basic. A lot of the homemade stuff, the fill is gel ignite and using commercial blasting caps, PVC plastic piping, iron piping, stuff like that. But I know sometime in the late 90s or early 2000s, I believe it was a German engineer that had gone to Karen State, and he had taught them a very wacky way to produce their own homemade bounding landmine using electronic detonators and a few other bits, which were, we came across a few of these, and they're quite an interesting thing to deal with. So
yeah, so that's kind of we look at, like, at least on the American side, I would assume it's pretty similar other places. We kind of categorize things, and you've got like your doctrinal landmines, right? Whether it be anti-personnel or anti-tank, and then you've kind of got IEDs as another category.
Yeah.
But I think, especially in the current conflict, and it sounds like in Asia as well, they're kind of crossing the stream there, right? Because like the improvised landmines, right? Like they're still very purpose built, and to a certain extent, they're kind of cookie cutter made, right? Like as long as people are following directions, the improvised aspect kind of quickly falls off, and now it's like a homemade landmine, right? Where the intent is still there. Did you guys have any kind of like published guidance that you were working off of that, or was it kind of all learning as you go and then just remembering those TTPs?
I mean, I can say this now because unfortunately the guy that taught me has unfortunately passed away. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be able to mention too much, because obviously crossing into Karen State, you are doing it illegally, crossing from the Thai-Burmese border across the border. So he was a country manager for Halo for a number of years across multiple countries. He was the head demining manager in Sri Lanka, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and as I say, a number of other countries as well. So being able to work under his guidance was really, really good. I mean, our TCPs really and our main SOPs were just, we find it, we blow it up in situ. That's the end of it. All we were trying to do was clear, as I say, 2 villages. One of the villages was actually being supported by a Australian Christian NGO, which had gone in and built a school in a banana plantation. The problem is they didn't know that the banana plantation was also a minefield, and they'd actually got away with it. The locals knew it was a minefield. So the locals had been running goats over it for maybe the last 4 or 5 years to try and destroy stuff. But we were still finding mines. We were still finding quite a lot of UXO as well across it. So yeah, it was interesting. Definitely an interesting place to work, because I don't know if you imagine a minefield in Cambodia, they're generally going to have it marked off. There's no civilian traffic going through. And if you can imagine us having our baseline with deminers breaching into this minefield, and next minute a local lady would just walk through you into the minefield and go and grab a few bunches of bananas and come back and just look at you going, what's the crazy white guy doing? And it was quite sad at times as well, because they'd come to learn to live with it as well. And the minefields that we were dealing with there, they were laid both by the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, and by the Karen as well, because they had to lay their own defensive minefields to protect the villages. So when we explained initially that, look, we're here to try and clear the landmine threat, they weren't happy with this because they thought that we were removing their protective field. Okay. So it was trying to explain to them, look, we know that you're laying landmines. It's not that we agree or disagree with it. We understand why you do it, but mixed in with all those landmines, you have lost landmines, you have nuisance landmines. Let's clear them. At least you know that this area is safe, and then mark your belts effectively.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I really don't have any experience in the outside of the military realm. So hearing stories like that and just trying to picture kind of what it would be like going to work day in and day out is an interesting thought process, especially joining that mission without that background. I don't think you hear. I don't hear about that too often. I'm on some of the Facebook pages and stuff for like UXO techs, but I think overwhelmingly those guys are all prior military, at least on the U.S. side.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of the black sheep within the community. I won't deny that.
But I mean, you've been doing it for what, almost 10 years now. So I mean, you're still around. So
yeah,
must be doing all right.
Gratefully.
Yep. So you did the Asia thing, and then came back home, and Russia made the push into Crimea, and you found your way over into Ukraine. How does that process even work? Like how did you kind of get that opening to go?
So I've been, ever since the protest at the back end of 2013 into 2014, I'd reached out to a few people on the internet, more of an interest. It wasn't a case that I had any plans to go to Ukraine. I was just interested in the protest because I knew next to nothing about the country. And then it's all over the TV. It's all through the newspapers. And I'm a bit inquisitive. And I thought, how do I get any knowledge? And I prefer to try not to take my information from the media if I can, bulk of it. So I reached out to a few people that were active on Facebook, that were on social media, that were talking about the protest. Got chatting to a couple of people who were very good and objective with communications with me about what was going on. And we just kind of stayed in touch. But while I was in the jungle, obviously Wi-Fi is not the best thing out there. So I didn't really have much contact with them until I got out. And then when I got out, I had a couple of emails and a couple of messages waiting for me. So I responded back to them, and they said, Crimea's been taken over. We've got fighting in the east of the country. Guys having to deal with landmines. We've got people that have no mine risk education, anything like that. We've got guys that have never fired weapons before that are going to the front line. We've got guys that don't know how to apply a tourniquet. And I'm not a combat medic. I'm no one special. At that time, I would not have classed myself as EOD in any way, shape, or form. But I had something that I knew worked, and if it helped save a couple of lives, more the merrier, in my view. So I decided to jump on a plane anyway, just to go and see it for myself and to see what the situation was like. I had reached out to the Ukrainian police at this point, and the state emergency services, because they both have EOD and demining units. I couldn't get any feedback from them because I couldn't find anyone that spoke English to speak to me on the phone. I then reached out to the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian National Guard. There was no legal framework for them to accept foreigners at that point. That didn't change till I think 2018. So that left me with a couple of different options. It was either go home or start to look at some of the Ukrainian volunteer battalions. So I ended up joining a unit that then became part of 3057 Brigade of the National Guard down in Mariupol.
Okay.
So I joined on with them, and then I spent about 3.5 years working from a base just outside of Mariupol, working the front line from Shirokina as far north as Pisky, just outside of Donetsk Airport.
Okay. And was most of that work still demining focused? I know you talk about training guys and some basic combat stuff.
No. So the only way for me to really join onto a unit was to join onto a combat unit.
Okay.
So I ended up as part of a small group of foreigners attached to 3057 Brigade, working as a reconnaissance unit outside of Mariupol. So my role within that unit was mine risk education, DEMS work. I picked up some other bits of training, should we say, in Southeast Asia from other individuals that kind of helped kick me forward on that process. And between that and the small bit of military training that I did have was just enough to kind of bind with everyone else. And I mean, we had a pretty mixed bag. We had ex-British guys, we had a couple of ex-American guys, ex-French Foreign Legion guys, Finnish guys. So between all of us, we were able to really sort the training out and actually work as a unit quite well.
Awesome. I think you mentioned the French Foreign Legion. I think so. When I was in Cambodia, we had 2 French military guys with us, and one of them was much better at English than the other one. But the one that wasn't great at English, I think he had spent some time in the Foreign Legion, and him just trying to explain how that organization is set up and run. It's a wild concept.
It is, yeah. Funnily enough, one of the other sapper that was the other combat engineer that was in the unit with me was an ex-French army guy, and a lot of the Ukrainians could not understand my accent at all. Even British people don't understand it half the time, and the Ukrainians couldn't understand it so much that I would speak to the French guy who barely spoke English. He would speak English at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians would nod and say yes, and we would kind of go around in this horrible circle. So it's got a little bit better over the years, but not too much.
Yeah, I don't think the frustration of sharing a common language with people but still not being able to speak to them is understood as well as it should be. Like,
yeah,
that was when I left Cambodia. We flew back into Minneapolis, and hearing that Midwestern accent was the greatest 5 minutes of my life. Like, after speaking to Cambodians for a month.
I think the strange thing as well, sometimes if you're working quite remotely, especially somewhere like Southeast Asia, if you're detached from society almost completely, if you do end up working with other nationals, say for me, so it would be American foreign nationals, or it would be Australian or something like that. It's so easy to start picking up that accent, and then you come home and people are like, why are you speaking Australian? Like, what?
Yeah. All right. So you did the 3.5 years in Ukraine first go around. What was your impression leaving Ukraine that first time? I assume it was an overall positive experience because you went back, but I think we hear so many things on the internet these days, especially social media, about dudes that did time over in the Foreign Legion in Ukraine, and I think a lot of it gets lost in translation. A couple guys might have had a really awful experience, but the war's still going on, so somebody must be doing something kind of right on the Ukrainian side.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my own views on that, and I'm going to be careful how I put them.
Okay, yeah,
I don't want to I don't want to put anyone down that's gone to help Ukraine. I'm not Ukrainian, but I'm so grateful to anyone that's come to Ukraine's help in any way, shape, or form. For me, I was very fortunate because I'd spent that 3.5 years. Admittedly, when I came out at the back end of 2017, I had burnt myself out quite badly. Mentally, it took a long time to kind of settle, and there was always the urge to go back. But it got to the point where I knew if I stayed at the time, I wasn't doing myself any good. I wasn't, it was just becoming dangerous for me and the people that worked with me, because I had burnt myself out. But through that 3.5 years, I had made a lot of friends. I'd worked with the one battalion that turned into a regiment, but through them, I'd worked with a lot of other people, whether it be Ukrainians or whether it be foreigners that had come to help that unit or other units. But this gave me a good idea of how the country works.
Yeah.
What the food's like, what your living accommodation like. Are you going to get ammunition when you want it? Are you going to be able to call in for an artillery strike if you want it? And these are all things that I totally understood. And generally it was no.
Yeah.
And I heard some horror stories when I went back in 3 days after the invasion, because day 2 of the invasion, because Zelensky turned around publicly to the world and said, we will take anyone that wants to come and help. Now, between 2014 and 2018, I'd had tens and tens of people contact me saying, how do I go? How do I go? And at the time, I kind of pushed them away as nicely as I could and just said, look, there's no legal framework. I was on paper as an instructor. If I'd have got captured, which nearly happened, or if I'd have got killed, there was no real legal framework around it. For all intents and purposes, I would have been a mercenary and all that, and would have been in a lot of trouble. When people started reaching out after Zelensky went public, I'm like, well, okay, he's said these guys are good to go. And then from the British side, Theresa May turned around and said, look, we're not going to prosecute anyone. And that was kind of like free game for me at that point. It's like, okay, bugger it. So I went public on social media and said, look, if anyone wants to go and help, contact me. And I was expecting maybe 10 or 20 people to contact.
Yeah.
What a bad idea that was. On 30 hours later, myself and 2 friends are trying to sift through 400 people wanting to go.
Wow.
So it was absolute carnage. And you can imagine what it's like as well, because there was a lot of good guys wanting to come in, but you also had a lot of people that would contact and say, hey, I played Call of Duty once, or, I do paintballing at the weekend. It's like, you don't know what you're setting yourself up for here. And that was the bad side of it. But on the good side of it, you had some phenomenal guys and girls contact, brilliant brilliant military experience, but from a Western military point of view.
Yeah.
So when they turned up into country and, well, what do you mean I only get 3 magazines? Or why have I only got 100 rounds of ammunition? Or, well, where's my air support? Well, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, where's the Kazavak vehicle? Well, it's the Lada. It's, and because of that, a few people did have really, really bad experiences. But even the ones that didn't, I think a lot of people got put off by the sense that this isn't the Western military, where we're not part of the British military, we're not part of the American military or the Canadian military or whoever. This is Eastern Europe at its finest.
Yeah, I would imagine, anybody that was fresh from, especially U.S. service that was going over there. I mean, we've had a hard 20 years, and I don't want to imply that it wasn't hard for folks, but we basically owned the territory that we were in.
Yeah.
And we had all those luxuries, right? Like we had completely uncontested air support. not only did we have air support, but we also had air support to the point where there was absolutely no consideration of enemy air assets. So I can only imagine somebody coming from that and going to the front line in Ukraine, where not only do you not have air support, but you also don't control the air, at all. Arguably, neither does Russia at this point, but they've at least got they have their freedom of movement more or less. I can imagine that'd be a pretty stark wake up call for some folks.
Yeah, I mean, there was one gentleman, I won't say what country he was from, who had a lot of experience from Iraq and Afghanistan. He had turned up into Ukraine, I think, about a week before the invasion actually happened, and he was heavily involved with the defense of Hostomel Airport before the Russian paratroopers took it over, and he had a really bad time there. And I've got a number of Ukrainian friends that were there for that fight as well. So they've explained it in no uncertain terms of what actually happened. And the gentleman, the foreign national that was there with that good past military experience from an SF point of view, had to be, I don't want to say escorted, but assisted out of country back to his home country to get support. That's the level it's on. It's not it's not just chucking rifle rounds at people.
Yeah. The difference in what probably anybody was used to before going in there is probably about as extreme as possible.
Yeah.
Without blatantly being on the losing side, right? Like, Ukraine is putting up a really good fight. So it's not like Russia's steamrolling them by any means.
Absolutely. I mean, when I went back in at the end of February, I honestly thought that we had weeks. The first 5 weeks I got into country, I didn't even leave Lviv to head south or east. There was, in my view, at that point, there was no point. It was just a case of get as many foreign fighters and as many volunteers into country, get as many medics in, get as much humanitarian and military aid across the country. I'm not talking firearms, but just, donated military surplus kit, uniforms, body armor, especially body armor and helmets and IFAC components. It wasn't until we started to see a break in the assault on Kiev, they were like, oh, actually, Ukraine might be able to push them back a little bit here. Because initially, within the first week, you were looking at a situation in Kiev and go, is there any point in me actually pushing through? Because I'm just one more person in Kiev. It does not make the difference.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't think anybody saw that transition going quite as starkly different as it did, which is a good thing, right? I mean,
no complaints. No complaints.
Yeah. So about how long was it then, after the initial invasion, before you were able to maybe transition out of kind of that initial logistics piece and start either working on the demining effort or I've been following you for a while, so doing the instruction and the training side and helping to bring the fight back to Russia.
Yeah, so it would have been the end. I think about the end of April.
Okay.
I think I'm trying like dates for last year. Last year was just a whirlwind of chaos, so I'd have to I can check dates. Yeah. I think it was roughly around the last week of April. Part of the guys that I had at logistics hubs that we'd set up took one of the vehicles and pushed guys down to Kherson full time. And then we took the rest of the people and pushed down to Kiev. So at that point, I linked up with a few people in country that I already knew that had another unit that was working under the SBU, under Security Bureau of Ukraine.
Okay.
So we started providing them with training. I had a mixed group of people, ex-infantry, a couple of good combat medics, myself pushing EUD, and a few other people. So we started providing support to them, and then I needed to go and speak with EUD police anyway on another matter. And when I went and spoke to him and was talking to the chief of police, just to find out what his situation was, I realized that at this point they only had, I think at the time, 280 EOD techs for the police across the entire country. I'm like, ooh,
Okay.
damn,
Yeah.
because, okay, they'd been involved in battlefield clearance since 2014, but on a very small scale.
Yeah.
And when he showed me some of the pictures of the storage unit where they were storing UXO, because they had no choice but to move it. It was either leave it on the ground or move it. They had nowhere to. They couldn't get out of Kiev to dem it anywhere. And you're literally talking a warehouse full of UXO, and you're going, "Oh, I wouldn't really move any of that." But it was an interesting time. So I just said, look, if you're happy enough for us to come and help as a team, I've got a full team. I'll start trying to pull in donations for kit and equipment for you, and just do whatever I can. And that relationship just started. Through that, we started doing a lot of clearance around Bucha and Irpin, which obviously not that long ago been liberated. We did all the clearance at Hostomel Airport. And then there's a forest position outside of Hostomel Airport. When we turned up, we thought it was roughly a square kilometer, maybe 1.5 square kilometer area of forest that was effectively just a trench city for the Russians.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we put a drone up, it was 5 square kilometers.
Holy cow.
There was a trench. At maximum, there was a trench every 50 yards. It was huge. Absolutely huge. And we spent weeks and weeks and weeks trying to clear this place. And you were literally just clearing everything that you could see on ground level. Because if you imagine like Cambodia, if you tried to actually start clearing it with nice baselines and lanes, we'd still be clearing it.
Yeah.
There's still landmines in that forest, but for the Ukrainians at that time, it was just get the bulk of the explosive ordnance off the ground to a safe place, damn it, be done with it,
Yeah. Is the bulk of your efforts still on the UXO side of the problem?
It's a mixed bag, really. I will always try to get rid of as much UXO as possible. If you're driving down the road and there's an arty shell by the side of the road, or there's a smashed up tin of 23 mil HE or whatever, I will still stop the car and, can I move it? Yeah, it's going in the boot of the car and getting rid of it, because you have so much energetic material lying around.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me kind of change it. So this is how I look at it. When you go to a border control to get into Ukraine, they search your bags. They're looking for explosive ordnance. They're looking for the IED that you might have in your bag. Why would I have that? I can walk anywhere in the country, pick up explosive material, and make an IED. So the more stuff that I can get off the ground, I hope to think that I'm limiting that risk just that little bit.
Yeah.
So I end up with a lot of UXO. And sometimes not very many places to dam it. But outside of that, for the mine clearance, it's normally places that are either designated by the police or by the military, where they've asked us to come in and support them to do route clearance. And then also, if we're working in and around areas, especially near the front line or newly liberated areas, I'll go in with a translator, and we will literally go from door to door, knocking on doors. Do you have any unexploded ordnance in your garden? Have you seen landmines? And literally just go in with a pack of UXO cards or a recognition book, and go through the book until they say yes or no. And it works, because sometimes people look at you coming down the street and think, oh God, it's the military or the police, and they go and hide away. And then when you knock on the door and say, we're just here to help, do you have anything? Oh yeah, I've got a garage full of tank munition because the Russians came through here 2 months ago. You know?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting point. I think one of my favorite aspects of the EOD mission is, you know, outside of somehow getting roped into like very active conflict, like we we are the good guys beyond any debate, right? Like it doesn't matter who you are, we are there to make the area safer, for other humans, which I think is pretty cool, right? Like every other career field, I mean, medics aside, right? Medics are kind of the same thing, but everybody else they really do have a side. Like they are on, in this case, the Russian side or the Ukrainian side. But the EOD mission is like we just want to protect, personnel and property, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the American kind of motto behind that. Um, yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Like you're just trying to go back through these areas and restore life to normal as much as possible for these people.
Because I mean, you, I have to look at it objectively. You know, Ukraine has used landmines. Russia has used landmines. They're
Yeah,
both firing artillery at each other. They're both firing ammunition of all calibers at each other. We're dealing with duds. You know, we're dealing with misfires. We're dealing with abandoned ammunition. We're dealing with explosives, exploded stockpiles, everything across the board. In my view, it doesn't really matter how it got there.
yeah,
If it does not serve a strategic purpose for the Ukrainian side at this point, and they don't want to move it, fine, call me. I'll come and get rid of it. That's
yeah,
fine. You know, the one thing I will not do religiously is if someone asks me to go and remove a mine belt, that's fine, but I'm going to remove it, and they get damned, or they get FFE'd and turned into training kit. Nothing gets passed back on.
yeah,
Um, that's just the way I work now. If you shot back to maybe 2014, 2015, yeah, it'd have been slightly different. I'd have, sometimes I'd have removed stuff and given it back to people. But at this point now, just get rid of it.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned using a drone earlier, which, I think I know it's been done, dating back a handful of years, but like I think this conflict has really highlighted the potential for the commercial drone, commercial UAS,
Yeah.
usage. How often do you find yourself using, whether it be a DJI or whatever, off the shelf drone?
Um, so I can't fly drones. I shouldn't be allowed anywhere near technology. It's amazing that we're
Yeah,
actually talking right now.
yeah,
But I've got a couple of people that do work with me that can fly drones, thankfully, a little bit better than me.
yeah,
We are looking at the moment to actually try and get hold of a DJI that has thermal capability
okay,
because it has been proven by the Ukrainians that if you run a drone with thermal imaging over a minefield around that last hour of light of the
yeah,
day, there's a stark contrast between the mines and the ground.
yeah,
Um, I've only seen the imaging and the video footage from mines that are surface laid. I've not seen anything that's been subsurface laid.
yeah,
However, from working with militaries from a couple of other countries over the past year, if an area has been dug in recently within maybe the last 24, 36 hours, again, you can see that difference through the thermal. So certainly from an EOD point of view, I strongly believe now that any EOD unit should have a drone, a commercial drone, DJI with thermal imaging, 100%.
yeah,
And also, it's something that we're going to start looking at as well when we're looking at submunitions, especially seismic, like the newer POMS 3. It's not the easiest thing to get to put a donor charge on.
yeah,
The Ukrainians are proving that you can just take a drone and drop a charge next to something. So, I think the use of drones now within the battlefield, not just for obviously combat, operations, but from an EOD aspect as well. That technology is going to grow and grow over the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have any doubt that it's going to get it's going to get crazy with the tools that are coming online.
Yeah.
I kind of regret I left the career field right when like the in my opinion like the most tangible like technological leaps were happening. ATAC was coming online. Um, the small drones were coming online. I mean, even lasers are becoming a thing, depending on who's paying the bills, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But the idea that you can have an air asset, on your person, and go do these surveys and potentially plot areas that you care about or that you don't need to care about. And then the new imaging capabilities, and maybe you get some AI in there to interpret that imagery a little bit better. It's going to be wild, and it's a good thing because even when this conflict eventually ends, I mean, I'm sure we've got a decade of work left in Ukraine, decade plus. I mean, we're still working over in Asia, just like you talked about earlier. So
I think we're looking at 100 years, just given the sheer size of Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainians don't like me saying 100 years because certain people within the government keep saying 20. I try to be a realist about it. Ukraine's a huge place. So from a humanitarian point of view, to be able to turn around and say Ukraine is now explosive free, I mean, look at, you must have seen the images and the videos of the trench warfare from around Bakhmut.
Yeah,
you're looking at trenches that have been dug, shelled, redug. They are full of UXO, they're full of AO, they're full of mines, they're full of clothing, living equipment, body parts. How do you go into that from a demining point of view?
Yeah, that's true.
How do you even start with that? You're looking at places that have had a trench. That trench has then been blown in on itself. It's then been redug, or one's been dug next to it. It's not like you're working, say, in like Southeast Asia or somewhere where you're working to a depth of, okay, so our SOP is to work to a depth of 15 centimeters, or our SOP is to work to 20 centimeters. We're looking at 2 meters.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How do you deal with it? I don't know how they're going to do it. I'm waiting to find out. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a long time.
No, I guess the scale of that problem is kind of hard to wrap your head around. Because you're absolutely right. Ukraine is I think a way bigger country than most people give it credit for. If people even fully understand where it is on the map in the first place.
Yeah.
And the front line from the 2014 conflict is not the front line from the current conflict. Like that is a significantly bigger contested area.
Well, I mean, the front line itself at the moment is nearly 1,000 kilometers long. In some places that front line's not really moved too much. In other places, it's moved huge amounts, but then it's being pushed back, and Russia comes in, lays landmines. Ukrainians push them back, lay defensive mines. Russia pushes them back, lays mines. No one knows really where half the mines are. Quite recently there was a few mine maps from the Russian side released that had been captured off Russian positions. And that gives us a much better idea of the extent that they have been mining. I mean, they're saying that Ukraine is the most heavily mined country on the planet. Well, I do remember them saying that it was Burma at one point, and that was 6.5 million landmines. So I think this isn't written down anywhere, but I kind of want to say a conservative estimate, is probably 7 to 8 million.
Holy cow.
Okay. If they're saying it's the most mined country on the planet, no one's demining Burma. Burma, they say, has 6.5 mil. So yeah, we've got to be talking 7 to 8 mil, I think.
Yeah. And that's you think that 7 8 mil is pure landmines, or are we looking at UXOs on top of that as well?
No, I think no. I mean, UXO. I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I certainly AT mines. Yeah, I reckon.
Okay.
I mean, to go back and look at the figures, and again, I will. I'm not here to hide the dealings of any side.
Yeah.
I know that Ukraine, as of 2020, still had Soviet stockpiles of PFM loaded into Oregon rockets.
Yeah.
They still, this is an official figure that is written down, and they still had, I think, 3.3 or 3.6 million PFM in Oregon rockets alone. And that's just PFM1 butterfly mines.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
guess. Yeah. If you loop those into the mix, I mean,
yeah.
gosh, the variety and extent of where those things could be, um, it's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of work for the army and the National Guard quite close to Crimea. The Crimea front has been very, very heavily contested area in the forest there. Uh, Myself and the volunteer team that I was running at the time, we did a lot of route clearance for the Kazvac vehicles because at the time they couldn't get in. So that we cleared about 6.5K of tracks through the forest for them. And every day that you were clearing, obviously you were having to keep to the tracks because that's what you were clearing. But because of that, you're in the open as opposed to having that tree cover either side of you. And a Russian drone would come over and you would hide under a tree and wait. And for the first couple of days, they shelled us pretty bad. And then after 3 or 4 days, they stopped. And my personal opinion is the drones had actually realized, oh, these guys are clearing routes. Why would you try and kill them? Just
Yeah.
just watch them, and then you know what routes are cleared if you make a push through. But every day in that forest, you would probably hear 50 to 60 cluster cassettes open every day, and you would tell the difference. Okay, is that point detonating, or do I hear nothing afterwards?
Yeah.
Is that PFM that's gone into the ground then, or is it POMS 2 or is it POMS 3? Generally, it would be PFM that they were shooting into that area. And then other days you would walk in and you would hear from the PFM 1S with a self-destruct mechanism. You'd be walking through the forest and you just hear pop, 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 pop. And it's just them going off after like a 6 or a 12 or an 18-hour delay. So,
Yeah.
just chaos, absolute chaos.
Yeah. And for anybody that listens to this and isn't familiar with PFMs, I mean it's an interesting problem to think about because there's really only enough explosives in those things to be a nuisance.
Yeah.
And they're the size of a 50-cent piece. They can they can get hung up in branches of trees. I mean, they don't weigh anything.
No,
And you're never going to get rid of all those things. You can't.
I mean, it's I can't remember if it's 36 or 37 grams of liquid explosive. I mean, they still have huge problems with them in Afghanistan from the Soviet conflict. Afghanistan is still covered in them. And what the Russians have been doing in certain places across the front line as well is they've been taking the cassette with the racks in. They have been taking a shovel, putting it in at maybe a 30 to 35 degree angle, pulling a PFM off the rack so it arms itself, sticking it in the ground and just pushing it down. So now you're dealing with them buried as well, and it's just like, oh, come on, it's, how much shit do we have to deal with at this point? So
yeah, man, that's wild. And I don't even know. I don't know how you get rid of PFMs in a large scale. I mean, they're not worth countercharging. Like, you'd be there all day.
Yeah, just if you've got a big pile of deck cord, and just ring main it or line main it, however you want to do it. But again, that leads down to another problem that we have. Energetic material, we have tons of it. We can always find energetic material. Can we get access to enough det cord? No. I doubt anyone from Dino Noble's on here, but I am going to be calling your office at some point because I know you're in Salt Lake City. You're 10 minutes down the road. I'm coming to see it. I mean, that is one of the bigger problems that we have is having access to enough stuff to be able to deal with things. I know at times I've posted up the odd photo and video that's led to a lot of delightful feedback from the international community from certain places in regards to EOD. But they don't understand the situation on the ground. We don't have access to enough stuff. There's times where just cannot get hold of electronic detonators. So you're taking capsule detonators and firework E-matches to make your own electrics. There's been a bit of an influx now of shock tube come in, which is great. But there's never enough of it. But I'm quite fortunate because I do have good connections with the military. You've got to have good connections with the police. If we need to get access to equipment or something, we can, from that point of view, we can make a phone call and say, can you come and help us do this? Or can you give us the tools to do the job? Certainly from an energetic point of view. But a lot of the SAPI units that I meet, a lot of the combat engineer units that I meet, they literally have nothing, to find. If you find a Ukrainian combat engineer or a sapper that has a mine probe, you've found a lucky guy, Yeah, it's hard, This is why you'll see on my social media, I'm constantly begging people for stuff, and it feels like begging. It is begging, but they need it, There is millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment going into the country. It's taken a while for the Western governments to catch on to how much demining equipment is actually needed. But they're still looking at the bigger picture. They're looking at demining machines. They're looking at bigger scale stuff. But unless the Ukrainian sappers can lead the way for the infantry units in the counteroffensive, we're not going to need the stuff because it's going to be Russia clearing the country for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know. People send me videos all the time of guys doing questionable things with explosives.
Sketchy stuff.
And I'm just as guilty as anybody of clowning on some of those guys. But I mean, that's a good point. If you don't have the tools and you don't have detonators, all the procedures that we know kind of go out the window when we don't have explosives.
The biggest thing that we teach, so we do a lot of teaching for military units across the country. It's mostly guys with minimum to no experience. These are fresh recruits that are just coming into military service. But then we'll also go and we'll do refresh courses with SAPA units, and we'll try and build up their capacity. So we've been working a lot with units in the East at the moment that are obviously having huge problems with counteroffensive because the mine belts that they are, I say mine belt, they're not really belts. You're just talking a 3 to 5 kilometer strip north to south of the country that is now flooded with mines. And it's trying to build up their capacity and see where the problems are. And we're making headway with that, so we're quite happy with it. But again, it doesn't just fall down to the combat engineer. It never should. The combat engineer is only as good as the soldiers that he has behind him. In my view, and this goes the same for the tanks. The tanks are only as good as the combat engineers in front of them clearing the path for them. So one of the biggest things that we do is just basic mine awareness and just trying to get it through to people that just because you're the sapper, we're not asking you to do the job. But if you're walking down a track or if you're walking through a field or wherever, you need to know if you're looking at, is that a spent RPG or is that a POMS 3? Because it's going to make a big difference when you walk past it. They need to be able to help build that threat assessment before the sappers can go into that area. So.
Yeah, that's good thought. I guess for anybody that's listening, you kind of hinted at it already, but what can we do to help you guys out on kind of the global scale?
On a global scale, that's a good question.
Because obviously I can't go buy you a roll of debt cord, right? Like
no, sure. Okay, I guess there's two ways here. One is more would be more supportive to me to help me and my people do what we do. And on a larger picture is anyone that's in the military, especially, is just try and help push the understanding that yes, it would be nice to get F-16 fighter jets. It's nice to get all this equipment, but we need to look at bare essentials as well.
Yeah.
If I don't know many British guys that went to Afghanistan or Iraq that didn't have a self-extraction mine kit.
Yeah.
If I could do one thing right now, if someone turned around and said, "Give me one project and I'll help you complete it," how do I get 100,000 mine probes into Ukraine? Because to produce mine probes, I prefer not to do it in China, but it's probably the cheapest bet. But I'm pretty sure that we can produce a mine probe for $1.
Yeah.
If I look on the US market or the UK market to buy them new from a company, these companies are going to hate me for this. I'm really sorry, but you're looking at $25 to $45 for a mine probe.
Yeah.
When you've got serving soldiers that have to buy their own kit and they're maybe only being paid $400 to $600 a month, that's a lot of food out of their family's pocket. It's
no, that's good.
So, I think we do have to kind of look back at the basics and anything. I mean, what can people do? I don't know anymore. Just share posts. There's so many good volunteers on the ground that are doing stuff, whether it be Western volunteers or whether it be Ukrainian volunteers that are on the ground. And there are a number of people involved in EOD operations. I would certainly try to push the need for kit, but more importantly is making sure the kit actually ends up in the hands of the people that need it.
Yeah,
that's the biggest tricky point. This is why when people send me kit over, I will physically put it into the hands of people that need it. Because if I look at things like medical kit, there was huge influxes of medical kit last year that came into country, but would then end up in a sorting office, or it'd end up in warehouse, or one wagon of it would go to one place, and that would be it. And it's like, well, we kind of need it spread across the board, really. So that's tricky. On a personal level, if people want to support, at the moment, myself and my partner, who's a paramedic, we actually met in Ukraine earlier this year. We're in the middle of setting up a charity now out of the US. So this is to work directly. We'll be working directly with Ukrainian police EOD. So the organization that we're setting up is 3-tiered. So it covers the EOD aspect, it covers the medical aspect, and then it covers the humanitarian aspect. So at the moment, even though we're not set up on the humanitarian aspect, we have English language acquisition skills being taught to the EOD techs, because obviously the more they go away to Europe for training, having that language base helps. Especially in the future when the war finishes, it's becoming more obvious that a lot of NATO-aligned EOD units, among other units, will more than likely get sent to Ukraine. So from that side, we're helping on that. Once we're up and operational with the ambulance side, we'll then be providing the ambulance support for the police, because at the moment they're having to draw from the national effort, and the ambulances are needed other places as well. And then from an EOD point of view, whereas we've done a lot of support for the military on the front line. My situation's changed a little bit in regards to my family, so I'm not going to keep rolling the dice as I have been. So we're going to be supporting their efforts more from the clearance aspect alone.
Okay.
So I mean, if people want to help support that, we'd be eternally grateful. Yeah. It's
awesome. Yeah, let me know when you get that set up, and I'll plug it as much as I can and get you guys the support you can.
I'd imagine that most people that are listening in are going to be US serving EOD or retired EOD.
It's a good chance.
It's a good chance. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hello, family. What I would also like as well, it's something that I'm slowly trying to set up, which is why we're having this conversation. Really is because I'm going to be in and out of the US a bit due to family stuff. The ability to be able to go and meet EOD techs, whether it be Army, Navy, Air Force, police, SWAT units, to help spread the information from Ukraine for their understanding. But I think also from an EOD point of view, something that might get overlooked a little bit, and as much as it pains me to say it, I think it does have to be said. At the moment, we have quite large numbers of foreign nationals in Ukraine. Not all of them are there for, how can I put this, the right reasons.
Yeah.
And this is on both sides of the conflict. We now have to look at, okay, well, what are some of these people learning, and what is the potential skills that they're going to then take back to their home countries?
Okay.
And I think from an EOD point of view, that's something that potentially gets overlooked, which maybe should be. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought.
Especially with the way technology is going as well, you know. If we look at the use of drone, like commercial hobby drones for combat operations, you know, it's
been pretty mind blowing what people are able to do with those. And we saw that, you know, before the Ukraine conflict kicked off. I think it's blown up that much more.
Yeah.
Because now it's the good guys doing it, and it won't always be that case, right? Like, you can get in some pretty nefarious activities with hobby drones.
Yeah. Agreed.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you and having this conversation, and I hope that your efforts continue being successful as much as possible, and that you're able to get the support that you need. And hopefully, you know, as more information comes out, and hopefully this thing finally wraps up, you know, we can paint that accurate picture for the struggle that's going to be recovering Ukraine. And it's going to be a struggle, you know, no matter how it ends. So hopefully people recognize that it's people's home, and it's, you know, potentially ruined for the foreseeable future. So.
Yeah, I think from a demining point of view, anyone that wants to, if they've retired and wants to get into whether it be the commercial sector or humanitarian sector, I don't think anyone's going to run out of work anytime soon. So.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. But.
So I'll see you there.
Yeah. I got a couple more years, and then we'll see. But cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy the relative safety of the United States until you find your way back over there, and hopefully we can get you in touch with some people. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for breaking my my podcast cherry.
Yeah, no worries. It's a new experience every single time. So.
Brilliant.
Hopefully any other ones you do are organized a little bit more effectively than mine.
Oh, I doubt it. Okay. Thanks very much, Derek. Nice to finally meet you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it.